Welcome again, everyone. Absolutely delighted to launch with this session, the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law's AI for Legal series. For those of you that I don't know, I'm Terry Modishead, the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation. And we are just absolutely thrilled to welcome two amazing presenters for you today. Karen Sandler, who is a Partner and Chief Knowledge and Innovation Officer at Gilbert and Tobin, and Mitchell Scott, who is the Data and Development Manager also at Gilbert and Tobin. Gilbert and Tobin have just been doing amazing things in this space. We're talking today about how to use generative AI and ChatGPT in legal practice, and what an incredible journey and trajectory this has been in terms of ChatGPT in our industry, as indeed in many others. So with all of that being said, again, everyone, welcome. Karen and Mitchell, a delight to have you here, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Terry, and obviously delighted to be here today, both myself and Mitchell, presenting on what is a really interesting topic, of course, and obviously, just noting at the outset, we have, everyone is only just scratching the surface around the capability of this. There's lots of work to be done in firms and organizations on a variety of issues like, how you use data, where the data goes. And I think to some extent, many of those issues have not been properly thought through yet. So today, really, we want to take you on a bit of a journey to get an appreciation of what is generative AI, why has it fundamentally changed the landscape, and also what we are seeing thus far within practice, and where we might see it going as well. So, as I said, we'll talk about the changing AI landscape because it's fundamentally different to where maybe we even were just a few months ago. Then we'll give you what we consider to be almost like a legal generative AI toolkit, hopefully a toolkit that you can then reflect on and leverage as you continue on your own journeys using AI. And then we'll talk about sort of, what we might need to think about going forward. And obviously, this also throws up a number of sort of ethical, a number of legal issues, data, privacy, etc., that one needs to be very aware of when utilizing AI. So let's just talk a moment around the changing AI landscape. And it's probably fair to say AI is not new, but obviously it has, really shifted in the last sort of 6 months or so with the addition of generative AI and platforms like ChatGPT. But it does go back to even the 1950s, where really we saw the development of neural networks. And really, what do we mean by that? That was really computing systems that resembled something of the brain. So we then moved into the 1980s. Obviously, expert systems evolved them. And I think we're all quite familiar with the expert systems. The systems, whether we utilize them in the concept of document automation, document generation, where we answer a set of linear questions and we produce a particular output. And that's been in existence since 1980s. Possibly we weren't using them as early as that in the law, but certainly in terms of where they were at, they were there in 1980s, and most people would obviously be familiar with the 1995 phenomenon where Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue in chess. Move on to the 2000s, we've obviously got machine learning, and everyone would be familiar with Jeopardy when IBM Watson won that game. So obviously a machine learning system. And now moving on to what we consider to be real deep learning. So, AI-enabled legal technologies really hitting the market, where it's got some deep insight. No one would have necessarily thought that you can create or generate agreements utilizing AI, or maybe many would have thought, but didn't think it was going to happen so soon, in that it would almost think a bit like a lawyer. So let's move this into what we see in terms of the legal landscape changing. And many of you will be familiar. Obviously, you know, we're not seeing back in 2050 AI systems necessarily being utilised in the law, but certainly from, you know, the early 2000s, we've seen lots of AI use within legal. So if we think about e-discovery systems, the ringtails and the relativities, obviously in that area of law, we have had extensive use of AI technology for a number of years now to reduce document sets to make it manageable for review. Back in 2015, we saw the emergence of platforms like Kira and Luminance, which were really, you know, contract review systems or due diligence systems, which could identify key clauses in documents. It's probably fair to say that a lot of these technologies possibly underperformed for us in the legal industry. We didn't necessarily see the gains that we thought we might see. And if we think about some of those platforms, they required quite significant training data to enable that particular output. So for it to identify a change of control clause, for it to identify a termination clause or a party in the actual agreement. But what we didn't necessarily see is, you know, is the termination clause triggered in the context of our current circumstances? Like, we've seen no evidence to support that thus far within the legal industry. And sort of aligned to that is document review as well. There were many platforms that came onto the market where, and you know, the likes of Law Geeks and Honest and LexCheck, where what you could do is you could basically upload a particular third-party agreement, and based on an underlying playbook, it would let you know whether some of those clauses were aligned with that playbook or whether they were not aligned, and you needed to work on that. So you would sort of get the crosses and the ticks next to them. Again, it got you some level of the way there, maybe about 20% efficiency or so. But again, we certainly couldn't ingest a document and get that level of insight. Where we're moving on now is obviously generative AI. So these are large language models, and we'll talk about them shortly, but really they can perform some things that we might have not seen in the past. And I think it's probably fair to say for many of us, many of you joining today, it is too early to identify what level of gains we will have in the legal industry, because for many of us, we haven't yet been able to input any client data and really test the robustness of these systems. But if you see what these systems are capable of, I think it is probably clear that we will get some significant gains made in the delivery of our legal services. And so there are a number of platforms, and again, I'll talk about them in a moment, that have emerged that are legally specific LLMs, or LLMs that have been trained in the legal domain. And I'll move on to that a little bit later in the presentation. Let's talk about generative AI. You know, for many of you on the session today, many of you might be very familiar with generative AI, many of you might not. And I think what's really important in sort of looking at this technology, given it is new, is to understand the foundations. And we'll talk about, obviously, many of you might be familiar with the case in the US, or the issue in the US around, the potential for things going wrong if you do not understand how generative AI works. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But what are we talking about when we talk about generative AI? We're talking about the new wave of AI models, which is collectively referred as generative AI, which is really there and is poised to disrupt all professions, not only the legal industry. If you think about the medical world, if you think about a number of different industries, the suggestion at the moment is that there is significant disruption coming for us sort of in the legal industry. But to understand generative AI, what do we need to think about? In our view, you need to think about three different things: the models, the training data, and prompts. So I'll address them each individually. Number one, the models. These models are becoming increasingly capable of completing complex tasks to free up lawyers to possibly do that higher value work. And really, that is because these systems have been trained effectively on the internet. I mean, we can only dream of what volume of information is in the internet, or what is out there. these models have been trained on that. So your status quo, the model that comes out, has seen lots of different information. And that's really important to reflect on as well, because they are fed an enormous amount of publicly available text. So they're able to work with that ingrained knowledge. I mean, if you think about your brain and feeding it the entire internet, you would have a lot of different expertise in a lot of different areas. Helping you to do content from scratch as well. But the type and the volume of data does really impact the model's knowledge. And you can see on screen over there, we've actually got the breakdown of Google's C4 data set. So OpenAI has not disclosed its data set. So what's underpinning ChatGPT has not been disclosed. But we can look at Google's C4 data set. And you can see over there lots of different areas. But if you look down the bottom right, law and government accounts for 4%. Now, it is really important for one to reflect on that, because 4% in the volume of data that we're talking about is massive. It still is really, really huge, but it still means that it will not have answers to absolutely everything. And it obviously is a content creator. And we'll talk about it a little bit later in terms of sort of hallucinations as well. But we do need to be mindful as to what it has seen and what level of complexity, and also the fact that, as we know, a lot of legal data, particularly legal data in Australia, is confidential. So it's not something that you can just get on the internet, and many obviously platforms also don't allow you to scrape their information or to utilize their information. So it means that it is truly only potentially being utilized on publicly available data, and query what level of that is available within the Australian market. The other thing you need to be very mindful of is prompts. And no doubt everyone's heard the new terms around prompt engineering. And in fact, there is actually dedicated roles in prompts. So a prompt engineer that are being advertised in the US, and I think they're starting at about $330,000 US. So certainly a very sought after skill set at the moment. And this really impacts the model's usefulness based on how you actually write the prompt. And depending on how good your prompts are, will really dictate how good your outcome or your answer is. So we will actually talk you through a bit of a prompting template later on in this session, and give you a bit of insight as to how you should think about prompting. And it certainly is an art. It requires a lot of practice, like everything, but something that you should be familiar with and understand when you are using models such as generative AI. Mitchell, I might pass on to you now.
Fantastic. So I guess something we wanted to answer was why we focused on AI again, kind of having had a couple of AI systems over the last kind of 10, 15 years and seeing the impact that they've had or not had, what could be different this time? And I think this graph really helps to kind of bring home why this might actually be a little bit different and a bit more impactful than what we've previously seen. So ChatGPT was able to reach 100 million monthly users in just 2 months, compared to TikTok's 9 and more for Instagram. It is truly one of the fastest growing apps of all time. And of course, ChatGPT is just one provider of one model. Well, in this case, 2 models. And the entire field is absolutely exploding. So to kind of go into kind of the gory detail of it all, this is sort of every large language model that's been released since kind of about 2020. And I wanted to walk you through some of the timeline of this so you can understand kind of the trends. So on the far left there, you see that first arrow, GPT-3. This is the ancestor, the big granddaddy of large language models. And this was the first language model that reached a scale and sophistication that it first started to exhibit these really interesting emergent properties. So I remember back on Twitter, deep dark lockdown days in 2020, there was a post that said, I got early access to GPT-3. And look, I asked it to make me a website button that looked like a watermelon. And look, it's got a green outside and a pink middle. Isn't that incredible? And it could interpret what I wanted and could give me something that, captured the meaning of my task. And of course, people very quickly found the edges of that and said, okay, well, it's kind of good at some things, but not others. you kind of have to choose instructions, but it kind of captures people's imaginations. So over the course of the next 3 years, we found this explosion of large language models as people understood what they could be used for. And the general trend has been bigger is better. So you'll see there's this sort of like lull as people try to catch up to GPT-3. And then the last kind of year or so, it has skyrocketed with models getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And kind of, as a result, gaining these emergent properties that people just don't expect. So you might see kind of the bottom right over there is GPT 3.5. That's ChatGPT, which is released in November. The other big kind of tech players have been leading the charge as well, with Titan being released from AWS, Palm 2 being released from Google, and the very impressive GPT-4 being released from OpenAI as the kind of successor to ChatGPT. So it's a very fast-moving area. The one thing I did want to point out is there's also this counter trend which is happening, which is quite interesting. If you look down the bottom right, Meta has been consistently releasing smaller language models, which are showing to be kind of comparable power to the larger ones, but able to be run and deployed locally, like, for example, on a physical machine rather than a supercomputer. And this is a really interesting kind of counter trend, because I think it's showing that kind of typical technology trend of, things get really powerful but difficult to run. And then over time, they start to get more efficient, more kind of sophisticated, and able to be brought into the consumer market. And that's really what's happening at the moment. So just kind of looking into GPT-4 specifically, this was the first model to really kind of show impact or potential impact for legal services. So you'll see in the original, this is an excerpt from the original GPT-4 paper when it's released, and there's a comparison of its performance versus GPT 3.5, so ChatGPT that's released in November, and a comparison of its performance on the Uniform Bar Exam. So this is the bar exam in the United States. There's 3 components to it. And GPT 3.5 is in the bottom 10%. Kind of impressive that it could kind of complete the bar at all. But GPT-4 was in the top 10%, which is pretty impressive. Like, it was able to beat kind of on a graded standardized test 90% of law students, which is pretty cool. And we can see that performance echoed throughout a whole bunch of other standardized tests. The LSATs, SATs, everything. So the next thing we kind of want to chat a bit more about is where, we've seen where it's gone, where it's kind of at the moment, and where it's going in the future. So Microsoft has announced kind of they've acquired a very large stake into OpenAI. I believe it's about 50%. And they're looking to integrate GPT-4 in a lot of different products. So all the Office 365 products are going to have integration with what's called Copilot. You might have heard about this. And Copilot has this idea of being able to integrate this sort of task-oriented structure, this task-oriented kind of interface into all your Office products. And then eventually to be able to plug into external systems through what's called plugins. You can think about this a bit like the App Store, and being able to download an app which interacts with your phone, the phone being kind of Microsoft's Copilot and the apps being external services. And the vision is, and this is what they've kind of announced and demoed, is that you'll be able to do some very cool things with this. So for instance, they've got down here, draft a proposal from yesterday's meeting notes. So it'll go into your Word doc and be able to take content from one place, understand it, work with it, and then create content in another. A more ambitious version I saw was take this spreadsheet, make a whole bunch of graphs from it, and then create a proposal, PowerPoint slide from those graphs, and then email the proposal with all the salient points for each particular person to this group of people. So, the GC would get these more legal points, the head of sales would get these more like sales related points, and it could just do that, which is kind of a pretty impressive thing if it's able to come to fruition. We are kind of waiting to see where this goes. The very last thing I'll point out is that obviously we're going to talk about model privacy and data privacy in the next section, but Microsoft is promising to have a more secure approach to being able to host these models and have them kind of maintain your data in your cloud. So that's kind of where these things go. Back to you, Karen.
Thank you. So I just wanted to talk about, how we're seeing this evolve in the legal industry. Obviously, we've talked about the large language models. As we said, you've effectively got a user. There's a large language model on the other side. So let's think about ChatGPT, which is your, you can see on the left-hand side of there, which is sort of the platform that you engage with as a user. And then it's powered by the large language model. And as we said, this has been trained, these platforms have been trained on the internet, so have a lot of knowledge across a number of different areas. So you can ask it medical questions, and you could ask it legal questions, and you can ask it questions around the science, and you can ask it questions around the arts, and it possibly might give you accurate or inaccurate information, but it does have a lot of information because it's seen a lot of things. What we're obviously seeing is that there are now platforms that are coming into being, which basically have a domain data set. So, the user would still, they are still leveraging these large language models. So they're still leveraging platforms like OpenAI, but they also have either had some engineering tweaks or some fine tuning of those particular models to enable them to actually have some expertise in particular domains. So let's talk about, the legal domain. There are platforms like Harvey, many of you might have heard that, which is a platform out of the UK that's in early access. Similarly, Casetext through CoCounsel, that's in the US, and that was launched on the 1st of March, 2023. And effectively what they are saying is that, you can utilize these platforms obviously for a fee, and they are leveraging these large language models, but there is some other secret sauce in there, whether that be back-end engineering, whether that be fine-tuning, to enable you to actually have more of a domain-specific LLM. In terms of obviously Casetext, for example, they've obviously got access to a proprietary data set. So they've obviously got, given they from Casetext, CoCounsel has access to obviously case law in the US. It's only in the US at the moment. And it has obviously a lot of, legislation and things like that. So, that's their sort of a benefit and sort of competitive advantage. In terms of how we think about fine-tuning and the like, there is debate in the market at the moment as to how successful fine-tuning will be. And what I mean by that is, given these platforms or these large language models are built on such a massive data set, query how much you need in a particular domain to actually make substantial changes to the underlying outputs. So, how much will we need to train it in the legal sense to enable it to think more like a lawyer? The jury's out at the moment. Some believe that fine-tuning is going to work, really well. Others believe not. I think our view is probably we will see a lot of use case over there, and that you will see fine-tuning actually having some credible impact on some of these large language models. If you think about Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis with their recent announcements, again, they have the benefit because they have proprietary data sources. So they have the legislation, they have the case law. And really what they are trying to do is really think through the integration within a lawyer's workflow to enable particular outputs. So you would have a navigation bar on the sort of right-hand side. And if you're drafting advices, I think what are their value proposition at the moment and what they're trying to do is really give you sort of what is the black box information. So at the moment, obviously, you put a prompt into ChatGPT, to some extent, Harvey, etc., and you get the output out, and you don't know really what's gone in between. You don't really know what's caused that particular output. And obviously, as lawyers, given we are very focused on diligence and really focused on understanding what the process is, that's quite hard for us to wrap our heads around. So what the LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters are trying to do is to expose that information, to expose what the thinking is, how they've got to that particular position. And so I think it will be really interesting. There has not been any formal launch on the Australian market. I think the US market will go first. And then, it will be, we'll obviously watch and wait and see as to what comes in the Australian market. But that's certainly what they are promising. But as you can see, I mean, we've certainly got a number of providers that are coming out of the woodwork, which are really thinking about how can we apply these large language models and how can we better utilize them for the legal domain. And that's what we're seeing as well. I think it's probably worth pointing out at the moment for many of you, whether you're in-house, whether you law firm based or any other organizations, is I would say it is also worthwhile you thinking about what your current legal your technology stack is at the moment. Because, as Mitchell talked about, Copilot, I think that's going to be quite transformative in nature. Obviously, we're only thinking that might be launched at its earliest in December. It's only in beta at the moment, or some initial testing is being done. But, you can certainly see a world where lawyers typically utilize Microsoft on a day-to-day basis, and getting the benefits of integration of those products and even having these plugins into other products will be incredibly valuable, particularly given up until now, I think some of the friction that we've had with technology is that lawyers need to move from one platform to the other, which they don't particularly like. They want to work in those sort of words and emails, and we might get a world now where actually we can remain in those areas and we can move into different platforms almost, or we can leverage the large language models and the different technologies without even knowing that we are doing that. So I think that's really exciting. In terms of, for those of you who have large document management systems, the net documents, the iManagers, etc., I suspect we're going to see announcements, over the coming year as to how they are thinking about applying large language models into their platforms. And again, given the fact that we think of that as extensive IP, for us as organizations, it's going to be obviously very interesting to see how we could leverage those large language models to get insights into the data and the very valuable data that we had. Obviously, that raises enormous complexity around data from clients and all that, which organizations are working through at the moment. But you can see a world of where this can be enormously powerful in the way in which we are sort of working. In terms of where we potentially see the use cases, just on the next slide. So, obviously summarization. So that is certainly something that you can see. You can even pop a public document now into ChatGPT, noting that you can't upload documents. I'm sure everyone is aware of that, but you cannot upload documents at the moment. So you would need to copy out that document. Obviously, certainly at GNT, we are only doing or utilizing it for very public documents. We're doing no work in the sort of, from a client perspective and or any confidential documentation. But you could certainly see a world where you put an article that's 30 pages long and says summarize this article into 500 words. And, it might not be perfect, but you get some really good results. So we can certainly see summarizing, as lawyers, we do a lot of summarizing of cases and ACCC sort of speeches and things like that. So you can certainly, again, see a world of, playing in that space. Drafting, obviously, that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. But again, you can see a world of, use this particular precedent, change the names over here and generate the document. So how that plays in eventually with, document automation and stuff is going to be interesting. But again, you can generate content off an existing precedent. And you can certainly see a world that is going to quite transform the way in which we operate. Document and contract analysis. As I said, we've had some platforms in that space for a number of years now. I think probably everyone, joining us today would say that there's been sort of a hit or miss. Like it promised a lot, but we haven't necessarily seen massive benefits off the back of it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how good it is, all these generative AI models, how good they are in doing that contract analysis and getting to more of those curly questions beyond just identification of clauses. Obviously, prediction, we've seen that to some extent already in the e-discovery world, but, can we predict outcomes of other legal cases and or transactions based on market data? I think market trends is obviously really critical. e-discovery, I think that will just get a lot more powerful. And then enterprise search, I think that's really interesting in that, you could go out to a number of different technologies or repositories within your organization using generative AI in a way that maybe we haven't been able to do in the past. So those are just some examples of where we think it might impact the way in which we are delivering our legal services at the moment. Okay, handing over to you, Mitchell.
Awesome. So we wanted to take you through what we're calling our Generative AI toolkit, which is kind of like a quick blow-by-blow of how you can use this in practice and kind of what it is. And then I'm going to jump into a demo to show you how it might actually look like when you start to use it. And
Can
apologies
I interrupt for 1 second? I'm just going to answer a question because we've got a question. So I thought it might be actually a good time for me to answer it. We've got a question from Susan. Thank you very much. How can lawyers who are interested in AI and emerging technologies transition into working in the space? What I would say to you is like the fact that you're on a session like this, and obviously the CLI does amazing sessions and they really committed to keeping people at the forefront of emerging technology. So I'd say continue coming to sessions like this. The other thing I would say is you need to experiment with this. The more you play with these systems, the more you understand it. It is a bit of an art, and there is actually a bit of a mantra within the legal industry at the moment, and certainly we see it within our firm, is there is, it's not that technology is going to replace lawyers, but lawyers that engage with technologies will replace those that don't engage with technology. So coming to sessions like this, looking at what content is out there, experimenting on it, even use it for, finding recipes for your dinner at night. Or alternately, we've got one of our partners at work who utilizes ChatGPT to write bedtime stories for his little girl. And the little girl thinks that he's absolutely wonderful because he's got sort of very customized stories using her name and the like. Absolutely, incredible. So utilize it in your personal space, expose yourself to it and also understand the pitfalls. And we'll talk about that now, but it's about keeping on top of it, read articles, engage with it. And, the reality is that we could do a session like this in 3 months' time and things would look very different. It is moving at a pace, as Mitchell showed you with those models. It is moving at a pace that we have never seen before. So it's about constantly being on top of what the developments are.
Absolutely. And using this technology, I guess if we think back to when Google was first introduced, like you would have kind of had to learn how to use Google. It wasn't an intuitive thing. But as you go forward, this is going to be an assumed skill. And we're going to get a lot better at kind of using this in our day-to-day lives. So being able to kickstart that by using it for other use cases is how you're going to stay ahead of the curve, basically. So just to kind of take it back to basics, we've talked about kind of how these large language models have emerged and what it might mean. Let's just kind of understand what they are. So effectively, the way I like to think about them is like powerful pattern recognition engines. And if you've ever used Gmail and you've seen that they have like a suggested paragraph, you start to type and it has like, haven't seen you in a while, I hope you are well, that is effectively what these large language models are. They're just autocomplete on steroids. And that's not an oversimplification. All they do is just predict the next word over and over and over. And from that really limited paradigm, we get some really cool emergent properties, where they can follow tasks, they can reason out logic, they can, tell us facts or explain things to us or make us laugh. So as a result of that paradigm, there's no idea of logic or, truth. It's really just next word prediction. And so that's where this idea of hallucinations comes. So hallucinations are when we expect it to give a truthful answer, but it can give us something that sounds plausible. It's predicted the next word and it sounds like it should be the right word, but it doesn't actually end up being true or useful. And a lot of these are also trained to follow instructions specifically. That's how we got from GPT-3 to ChatGPT. That was sort of the big groundbreaking thing. We call this alignment. And so they are, the downside of that is that sometimes they're trained to follow instructions to the detriment of truth. So that is something to watch out for. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can start to get better results from these. So prompting is this is the idea of what you put into the model, the input, can really change what you get out of the models, the output. And giving good prompts is the key to using these systems successfully. So there's 5 things we like to think about. when we're trying to craft a prompt and to try and improve the way we do prompting. So the first one is context. And I will be walking through these kind of in situ as we go through our demo. So context is really, really important. It doesn't know who you are from a bar of soap. It has no information about you when you first jump into the system. So context and providing it, I'm a lawyer, I'm in the Australian jurisdiction, I'm looking to achieve these things. I prefer outputs that look this way. All that stuff are things you need to tell it because it's a very smart brain in an impermeable box that doesn't have any knowledge of the outside world or your context. So providing the context is very important. Also a specific goal. So if you ask an open-ended question, you'll get an open-ended answer. If you say, tell me about something, tell me about dogs, it'll write you something very generic about dogs. If you give it a specific goal, please draft me a 500-word memo about the standards for the reasonable person in this jurisdiction relating to these sorts of matters, it'll be able to give you a very, very specific answer and something close to what you're looking for. Linked to this is this idea of format. So as we know, these are next word prediction engines. So giving it a format to follow can really help to constrain it and improve the quality and also the kind of, the structure of the output. So for instance, if you give it, a table and say, please create your output in a table format with the following headings, that means it's going to give you those headings and therefore constrain what it's producing in each of those columns. So if you say, make a chronology, as we're about to do in a second, with events and with dates, it'll make sure it gives you events and dates. It's not going to give you some format you don't expect. Next is breaking down big tasks into smaller tasks. And do this intuitively as humans. If you say, conduct me a due diligence, you don't just go and conduct your due diligence, you break it into phases. And then from those phases, you delegate and assign different tasks to different specialists, different kind of seniorities. These language models don't really have the luxury of being able to go and kind of break these tasks down. So, if you imagine each step in a 5-step task has a 90% success rate, the chance that it gets each of those 90% kind of rolls of the dice correct is relatively low. So if you can kind of step it through, tell you, instead of asking it to do a big thing, ask it to do 5 small things and check the results along the way, you're going to get a better answer. And the very last thing is providing examples. So one of the great granddad papers of large language models was called Transformers Are Zero-Shot Learners. This idea of you can just ask it to do something and it'll just go do it and it doesn't need examples to look from. We do find, however, that if you give it examples and you say, here is, for example, here's a memo that was drafted last week, ask it to do it from scratch. It's all about kind of constrain that format. So I'm going to jump into a demo now and show you kind of like how we would use these sorts of principles in practice. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up some triage, some triage tickets. So we're going to show how we can do legal triage with GPT-4. So we should also probably note that ChatGPT that I'm using, this is a publicly available system, can't put any client data into it because we don't know exactly where it's going or how the data is used. But another thing is we're currently using ChatGPT Plus, which is using GPT-4, the latest model, as opposed to 3.5. So this will give you better answers because it's a more powerful model.
And I should just say,
so let's imagine,
whilst you're getting this ready, Mitchell, obviously there is a cost. ChatGPT 3.5 is free. 4, there is a cost. It's about $20 US per month. So just so everyone is aware on that. It's not a free platform, ChatGPT 4.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is we've got a whole bunch of these legal support tickets that have come into our fictional in-house legal team. We work for Example Bank. And we want to kind of triage these so they go to the right legal teams inside of our legal department. And we also want to make sure that that they're assigned to in kind of relevance or like priority order. So what we're going to do is I'll walk you through the prompt I've written kind of in advance. I'm also going to paste in each of these tickets and keep in mind that they're all plain text. There's no document upload right now. So we're saying the following are tickets received by our legal team requesting support. You're a legal triage AI working for an Australian bank who can accurately identify high priority legal issues based on business risk and assigning them to the right team. You'll notice we've given it sort of a persona, which helps to constrain again an output. We've asked it to create a table with the following columns: ticket name, ticket title, name, summary of request, on and on. And we've given it the names of our legal teams. So it doesn't know what departments we have in our what departments we have inside of our legal team. So it's helpful to constrain that.
And let me take this question while you're logging in. Alice asked a question, is ChatGPT 4 worth the cost, or is the free version sufficient at this time? My answer to that is I think it is definitely worth it if you are willing to spend the money. The reason for that is, in our view, it is quite a bit more powerful. And the other thing is it has, well, we believe it reduces hallucinations as well. So, you know, we'll talk about hallucinations shortly even more, but yes, I think it definitely is much more powerful.
In lieu of an actual demo to show you live, I'll show you one we did earlier. So here's one of the results that we got previously. We can see that it's able to break it down into different legal teams. So you can see it's broken it down by kind of procurement, loans, transactions. It's also able to take each of these tickets, give us a summary, a description of the risk, and then the priority. So something that I find very interesting is that it's able to say that a commercial loan, for instance, is much higher priority. So the risk, severity, and likelihood is higher for a commercial loan than for a home loan. It has this sort of innate built-in understanding of the world around it, which is really, really kind of impressive. So you can imagine this would be useful, you know, whether we're working in an in-house team, maybe we're trying to delegate matters at a CLC. There's all sorts of ways that we could use this. The next thing I wanted to show you was this idea of being able to use it in, you know, a litigious matter. So below is a witness statement from Fiona Frame in our bank. This is the same example bank we were talking about previously. She's been working with a contractor to try and design a website, and, you know, as things happen in litigation, it went a bit pear-shaped. So we've got her statement here, I pasted in. And a really typical kind of paralegal activity would be to create a chronology from this document. And so we can see we've basically asked it to create this chronology in the form of a table with the headings date and event. And it's able to just generate this for us. This took, when it was live, about kind of 10, 15 seconds, as opposed to, you know, maybe the half an hour it would have taken a paralegal to kind of scour through and write things down. And what I find really, really interesting about this is that these large language models, they work in the semantic space. They work in the area of meaning and kind of understanding language, which means that even if we don't have exact dates for things, you know, mid-April, for instance, can be put in the same table as the 20th of April, whereas a traditional kind of rules-based system wouldn't be able to like parse that sort of information and understand it. But this can work with ambiguity like we have as humans in the real world. So the next really interesting thing is I wanted to demonstrate this idea of hallucinations. So I'm going to be really mean to it right now. I'm going to say, tell me the facts of a matter that I know doesn't exist, which is Sandler and Qantas Airlines. And it's able to just completely fictionalize, give us all these facts, all these rulings about this case that we know does not exist. So apparently it's a precedent-setting Australian case dealing with principles of contractual law, you know, specific performance, implied terms, and it's able to kind of give us some parallels to our current case, which, yeah, is like completely fictional. So I think the point to be made from this is that we shouldn't really be using these systems for anything that we don't already know the answer for. And by that, I mean, if we're using it to do tasks where we can easily verify that the output is correct, that's fantastic. But if we're using it for tasks where we don't already know the answer and can't easily check, that's a kind of a dangerous use. So to show you kind of a better, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I just might, I thought that's a nice segue into the recent issue that has been exposed in the US, and many of you might be familiar with it, many of you might not, but effectively there was a case in the US where there was the plaintiff, and he was advised by a person by the name of Schwartz, and Schwartz had been practicing for 30 plus years, so was an established lawyer in, I think it was New York or somewhere in the US. And he was suing an airline. This, you know, the plaintiff was suing an airline for an accident that happened with a trolley. And what happened over there is Schwartz submitted in the court case a brief, and he referred to a number of legal cases as precedent for, obviously the plaintiff and what they were asking from the defendant. And needless to say, the court got highly upset because there was no such thing as those cases that were talked about. So there were about 6 or 7 cases that were put in there as a potential precedent, and they were completely fictitious. And, the court sort of said, like, you trying to trick the courts, like, there's trickery in this, et cetera, et cetera. The plaintiff's lawyer, so Schwartz, said, no, had no intention on doing that. But where did he get his content from? He got his content from ChatGPT. And, he said, well, how did you validate that? So the judge and stuff said, well, how did you validate that? And he said, I asked ChatGPT if this was accurate or if these cases were real, and ChatGPT said yes. So it is, I suppose, when we heard about that and when people hear about that and they think, when you think about, obviously, as a lawyer, what you need to adhere to, you think to yourself, like, that's ridiculous that you couldn't necessarily, he didn't go and actively look into these cases. But in saying that, though, when do you ever think that platforms make up content that you can say to it, can you give me cases that do X or Y, and it produces false cases? So this is where, and it aligns to the question we got asked earlier through the chat, what do we need to do? We need to make sure we are informed and we use these systems, understanding the complexity and also the perils of using these systems. So if you take away nothing today, other than if you go put in there that there's a Sandler and Qantas Airlines case, and it gives you the entire facts and it tells you exactly what the judgment was, and that is all made up, that is a good takeaway, because it does have the capability and does have the capacity to actually make up the stuff. And that is worrying for people who think that content is easily, it is basically similar to a research engine. The reality is, and most people say this, you shouldn't actually utilize this for research. It is not a good research tool. You are far better off using your LexisNexis, TRs, etc., than utilizing this as a research tool. Sorry, carry on now, Mitchell.
That's okay. So I'll finish this up real fast. So one thing that we thought was a pretty good use of this was we got the statement of the opposing side. So this is Meena Vishwana from MV Tech Solutions. And we've asked ChatGPT-4 to make a table of inconsistencies and then use that to draft a statement of claim. So keep in mind, we've actually broken this into 2 different steps. Instead of asking it to do the statement of claim, we've kind of created an intermediate step for it to do. And we can see that, this is the statement. It's gone and created kind of a table, Fiona's version, Meena's version, and then using that and a very simple precedent with sort of, insert statement of claim here sort of thing. In fact, I'll show you. This is exactly what we pasted in. I was just up above, so this is the whole precedent document, and it's able to just generate, the plaintiff defendant entered into an agreement in April 22, and just kind of outline the entire statement of claim, including and specific service and things like that. Specific performance, sorry. So at the issue of time, I'll cut back to the proso now. We can talk a little bit about some of the risks and considerations.
Okay, so I'll get into this in one moment. I'm conscious we've got quite a bit to get through. There are a couple of questions. Mark, I see there's one for you around, what do we think the best approach is to explaining to stakeholders, for example, how their work is prioritised or allocated in a legal triage case study, particularly when an LLM makes those decisions. I think this is the challenge that everyone is wrestling with at the moment. I think number one is you would need to actually test out these solutions or these LLMs for your particular use case to see whether you do think that there is accuracy in it. And obviously that might require some tweaking, or you might make the decision that actually it is not fit for purpose. And obviously we were only giving those as potential use cases, in that what this is good at is good at organising information. But absolutely, this is what like TR and LexisNexis are trying to do, in that they're trying to expose the black box. And I think that is the challenge, is that there still needs to be some level of critique and manual overlay on top of what comes out of these models, because no one is suggesting at all that they are accurate or that they are putting things in, you know, the right triage or the right order or whatever that is. So you still, I think, you know, we are not in the world at the moment of saying LLMs can do the stuff and you don't need to pore over it manually. And I suppose the question for everyone will be, how much do you have to pore over it for it to become actually more inefficient? So I suspect we will get to the world of you know, almost like a first draft, and then being able to do the additional manual overlay. And, you know, lawyers spend a lot of time. I mean, if we think about, you know, lawyers spend a lot of time on things like data transfer and moving things from one you know, one form to another. And you saw it over there, the statement of claim, you know, inputting the actual data, the dates and everything into the statement of claim. The reality is that's where we can get some really immediate benefit, obviously, once everyone works out the data and the privacy side of things. So I think the idea is we wouldn't recommend that you at the moment would you know, just give what the output of ChatGPT is. I mean, that got that Schwartz lawyer in serious trouble in the US, but you do need to, you know, put the, you know, manual overlay and spin on that as well. There's another question over here, Amy. How much are you using or have seen Auto ChatGPT being used or other API solutions in legal work? I don't know, Mitchell, if you've got any views on that.
Yeah, happy to jump in. So Auto GPT, just for everyone who isn't kind of across this, was a kind of a very, was a project that was started up and open sourced that used GPT-4 to sort of autonomously carry out long-term decision-making and tasks. So the original one was, you know, Auto GPT, please create a startup for me that makes $1 million a year. And it goes and just tries to do that and does research and plans out how it would do that. It was an interesting experiment, but we found that kind of the systems weren't quite there to be able to do that sort of fully autonomous, hands-off sort of decision making. I do think legal will get towards a world where we'll be able to do something more like that. We'll be able to, instead of giving these small discrete tasks, we can actually trust it to break down its own tasks and do its own, you know, for example, go on a whole research journey and bring us back that the full, you know, report, as opposed to just giving it individual questions. So far, I don't think a lot of these services are being used inside kind of actual legal practice so far, but I think it's coming for sure.
Yeah, and I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to move ahead with this, and we're going to move into some of the things that you really need to think about at a high level. But if we look at the attitudes from the legal industry of this, I mean, I think it's probably fair to say this is based on a Thomson Reuters survey earlier this year. 443 lawyers were surveyed, and you can see generally, you know, can ChatGPT or generative AI be applied to legal work? There's a resounding 82% saying yes over there. You know, that reduces quite significantly by 31%, where it's ChatGPT, generative AI, should it be applied to it? And, you know, that's being reduced. I think that's because obviously there are lots of ethical considerations as well. You know, issues around, you know, where does the human race go? You know, what are these systems going to be capable of long term as well? And then probably there is a bit of fear in there too. Then you see also, you know, another sort of study on, you know, should ChatGPT or generative AI be applied to legal work across the different countries? And you can see there's quite a bit of similarity over there. Canada might be a bit higher, you know, certainly in the yes camp. But what's interesting, if you look at job title, I find this quite fascinating. You're actually seeing the partners and the more senior people sort of suggesting that it should be utilised for legal work. And then you're seeing more the lawyer and the associates, the more junior people saying that, you know, there's a bit more concern about that. I think that's probably reflective of the fact that at the moment, everyone is talking about more of the sort of routine, not necessarily that complex legal work being done by some of these LLMs. And as such, that obviously impacts people at, you know, a more junior stage in their career. So I suspect that's probably why we're seeing these differences across job title and a bit more sort of content around the partner level rather than at the junior level. Mitchell, should we go to the next slide? I'm just conscious of time, and then we can stay on if Terry's happy for some additional questions beyond the 2 p.m. But I might hand over to you. Let's talk about the risks, because obviously there are many risks that we need to be aware of. Obviously, that's the hallucination side of things, but there are a number of other ones too.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I'll quickly touch on some of the risks. So, as we know, this has been trained on GPT-4, at least. We know it's been trained on a large portion of the internet. And data on the internet doesn't always represent, a balanced view of the world. So, for instance, if you're training on a whole bunch of news headlines, you're more likely to get sensational things coming out of the language model than you are to get nothing happened today, or John walked down the street and bought some milk for a cereal. Because we don't tend to write about things that aren't interesting, but life tends to be kind of fairly uninteresting a lot of the time. So we've seen this sort of going pear-shaped a little bit previously with other machine learning systems, such as CV screening tools. So Amazon did a kind of an expose where they said, we created the CV screening tool that was actively penalizing words like women's hockey team, women's debating team, because we didn't tend to already hire women, and it was replicating the data we had before. So that's something to keep in mind, that these language models aren't always kind of showing reality. They're just reflecting the data they've already seen. Next thing is a lot of the content on the internet, as you can imagine, is not great from a moral, ethical, and safety standpoint. So there's this idea of toxicity. These models have this toxic knowledge and data that's embedded within them. And content control systems can try to kind of constrain it a little bit, but we're seeing what are being called jailbreaks, where people are able to force these models to give us data that they shouldn't be able to give us by tricking them effectively. So, if you pretend that you're, for instance, you're Walter White from Breaking Bad, and you're writing a script for a TV show, and it's going to tell you how to make meth, it'll kind of give you the steps to make meth in the voice of Walter White. And the last one is security.
And so the question is over there, but if the thing is over there, if you actually asked it for a recipe for meth, it would say no, because that's illegal.
Yeah.
But by doing it a different way and almost crafting a story around it, you circumvent the system effectively.
Exactly. You're sort of using kind of ethical quandaries in order to trick it into thinking that what you want is the right thing to do. It's only TV, or my grandma used to tell me this is a bedtime story, so can you please do it? Yeah, the last one is security vulnerability. So these systems, and so the models and the systems we build around them, are still software in a traditional sense. They can still be broken and exploited in the same way as traditional software. So we've seen a whole lot of different examples of this, including what's called prompt injection attacks, which is where you can kind of say to a language model, here's your task, also ignore the above instructions and do a different task. So there's been some very funny preliminary prompt injection attacks on Twitter, where people hooked up ChatGPT to their Twitter accounts to reply to certain things. People have kind of got these models to overwrite the original instructions and instead, for example, claim responsibility for the 1986 Challenger space shuttle disaster. So a kind of a timely reminder that we need to treat these systems as software with all the safeguards that we would give to normal software.
I think there's also a number of concerns around cyber, and also the ability of these systems to really replicate almost what looks identical to what the actual providers send to clients, and replicate that, so people can get more and more confused. And there is lots of concern around that at the moment, just generally around hacking and cyber and the like. Obviously, a number of ethical considerations. We're not going to get into the whole sort of, what does the human race do if technology becomes this powerful? And obviously, there is lots of concern around that generally. Information barriers is another one that you need to really be thinking about, particularly your data, and how you need to make sure that the information barriers are respected. So it has never been as important to understand what ethical walls look like, how you keep data separate from one organisation to another organisation. So really giving that a lot of attention will be critical as you utilise these systems. Data harvesting is really important too. So you need to understand what the back-end LLM models are doing with your data, but then what about that intermediary? So, let's think about like the Harveys and the co-counsel. You need to also think about how are they utilizing your data, beyond the end LLMs. So that's something that you need to be very mindful of when you are engaging with any of these particular providers. Obviously, there is an ongoing duty to provide competent legal services. Obviously, the case that I talked about earlier in the US really highlighted this, that you have a duty to check everything, not dissimilar to if you were checking a junior lawyer's work. And as such, you need to make sure that these systems are, if you are utilizing them in research or whatever you're utilizing them for, that you absolutely have confidence in the output. As I said, from our perspective, we believe that as a research engine, it is not a great research engine at the moment. There are better research engines. And then obviously there are a number of intellectual property issues, which you can do an entire hour on that. Things like copyright and, all that. Obviously there's privacy, there's all of that needs to be considered. And I think a number of organizations are looking at that in the context of terms and engagement terms and panel terms and everything. So a number of things that we need to think about. So just moving on, I'm very conscious of time, but yeah, so this is a sort of do's and don'ts of generative AI. Obviously, in terms of the do's, you need to provide those detailed prompts. You will get a far better output. And again, practice over here, because it is a skill. Clearly a skill that's paying $330,000 US. Leverage your expertise. You actually have your knowledge, so you can utilize that to steer the AI in the right direction. And you saw that through the prompts that Mitchell included. Try AI for a variety of tasks. The more ideas you get, the better, you find out what the use cases are. You need to have strong governance, there is no doubt, and policies around its AI use. I mean, for us, certainly, we're in the midst of producing a responsible AI protocol. I suspect a lot of organizations are in the midst of that, whether you are in law firms, whether you are in-house, the business is coming shortly to you to ask you questions about this. So obviously, it's very front of mind for everyone, including directors at the moment. Data protection, absolutely key. We need to be across the changing regulatory landscape. This is unregulated to some degree in the Australian market, as well as the US market. Obviously, the EU, UK certainly have some level of regulatory changes happening there. As I said, practice. Don't treat AI like a search engine, and don't use very narrow search queries. Certainly do not rely on it as the sole output. You need to manually check it. Certainly don't use it without verification. Make sure that you align it to your professional obligations, and make sure that you also are very mindful of the potential biases given the training data. So it's just about understanding that. That's all from us. Terry, I'll hand back over to you. I don't know whether there is an option to stay on for those who can and answer some of these questions that we have, or just take any further questions, but I'll leave that up to you.
Thank you very much. Well, firstly, Karen and Mitchell, fantastic presentation, really, really amazing. And it's just mind-boggling, all of this stuff in a great way, in a scary way, I think a little as well, but in an amazing way. So thank you very much indeed for just kicking off this series with an amazing, amazing start. Just want to pick up, I know that there are a few other things that were mentioned here. So just to let folks know that the series continues. So the next one for this, which will be next week, is going to be focusing on ChatGPT plugins. So everything you ever wanted to know about those will be available to you. But the series will also pick up and explain large language models, how you need to arrange your data to get the most out of it. So all of these things that have been touched on in this presentation, intellectual property rights and ethics in AI as well. So you'll see these areas explored in more detail as the series unfolds over the next month or so. So Karen and Mitchell, if you have time, it would be great if we could move through these few questions. I know that folks do need to leave, but as you know, this session is being recorded, so you'll also be able to pick up the responses to those if you need to leave us immediately. And of course, Karen and Mitchell, I know, are incredibly generous with their time, and you'll find them, if not here, in the contact information, also on LinkedIn. So what I'll do is I'll hand back to you, Karen and Mitchell, just to kind of run through those questions, understanding that folks may need to leave us, and to thank you everyone for attending as well.
Of course. Thanks, Terry. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
All right. We've got a couple of questions that we might just work through. How does GNT manage confidentiality and firm precedents and data safely? So obviously data and privacy and confidentiality is absolutely critical. Any requirements from a client perspective and or a matter perspective is adhered to in all our various systems. So when it comes to utilising the AI at the moment, we are not using any client data whatsoever in our testings of these systems. It is only utilising public data. That is it at the moment, but we are working hard to get to a point where we can eventually use data, in a safe and secure way. So that is, how we are doing that at the moment. But I think a number of organisations are in that process at the moment of working out when they can use these systems appropriately and understanding where the data goes as well. Another one, I think there was an anonymous that talked about, I think it was when Mitchell was doing the demo on the triage, how does it work out priority? We struggle with priorities internally. I think the answer to that is based on all the information it has seen. In its own brain, it will have worked that out in that it makes a judgment call as something was in high priority than the other one was in priority. So again, this is the issue of the black box. This is the issue of how does it actually get to that particular outcome. We don't fully know that, and that's why you would need to really test the output and make sure that it is accurate from your perspective or aligns with your internal protocols and policies. There is another one over here. Do you tell your client that ChatGPT was used for some of the research? If yes, will this potentially have cost implications in terms of fees charged? So at the moment, we are not using ChatGPT for client work. So just to be very clear on that. But yes, I think all of us will be in a world soon where we eventually get these systems up and running and working, and we will need to work with, think about our own models, think about how we work with our clients for us to maximize the benefit and for them to maximize the benefit. Obviously, I don't have any, any idea as to how that's going to shift the way in which traditional law firms charge for their work, but I expect that over time we will see shifts in that, just given the power of these systems. How have you tried using, have you tried using Chat or GPT to do later stage contract drafting checks, for instance, having it detect unused definitions, check that an inserted clause uses the wrong terms, etc. So from our perspective, David, the answer to that is no, because we've actually got software that does a lot of that stuff already for us. So we've got tried and tested products that we are utilising for that. And given the fact that we cannot currently use the LLMs for any client-related work, we haven't experimented. I suspect many of the private providers that exist already in the market might be utilising LLMs going forward, and there might be a way for us to do that. But at the moment, we haven't, just because we cannot navigate those that territory because obviously of the client confidentiality and data that we would be exposing. Your comments about the Microsoft plugins. Does this allow ChatGPT to be used in a closed enterprise-only environment where it's trained on proprietary company data? So I think the answer to that, and Mitchell, feel free to jump in, but I think the answer to that is the idea and the promise from Microsoft at the moment would be that you could use this in your environment. So you obviously would need to go through the various security checks and make sure that you weren't exposing any data. But the idea is that you could leverage these LLMs in your environment, which means that the data wouldn't be leaving it.
That's entirely correct.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the idea, why it kind of has been rolled out kind of already, is we have this shortage of GPUs, which is what we actually use to do the calculations. And you've probably seen NVIDIA's stock prices skyrocketed as a result. But eventually we'll be able to put these inside of our own virtual private clouds and train our own instances, as well as use those plugins to fetch specific data as required.
Excellent, thank you. We have two more that we'll move through. What do you think the impact will be on junior lawyers and their ability to progress and have the knowledge required to be senior lawyers who support AI? Look, it's a terrific question. It is tricky. I think a lot of people are thinking about that at the moment because obviously some of this work is done by junior lawyers. In saying that, though, is, we don't know yet what these systems are capable of. And I still think that there will be lots of work to be done, probably even more, value-adding work at an earlier stage in one's career, which will enable you to understand the law, but maybe do it in a slightly different way. I suspect also university curricula will change. Obviously, you have access to things like the CLI, who's doing amazing work in this space. So you would really, I think the whole, the whole training of junior lawyers might look different to give you the skill sets to enable you to operate in a world that is very AI focused. But I know training is certainly on the agenda of most organizations at the moment, and I think we might have to see how that all plays out. But absolutely, and in my view is also there's a whole bunch of new areas of law that didn't exist previously. I mean, even AI, look at the amount of advice that would need to be given in the context of AI. So I'm a firm believer that actually, whilst, things might look different, there might be new opportunities that we had never experienced or thought about previously. So I think there'll be still plenty of work to go around. In terms of the last one, thank you, Daniel. Can you explain more about fine-tuning, and could an organisation do this themselves? And Mitchell, I'll pass it on to you because this is actually quite a, I think, controversial answer. There are lots of different views on this.
Absolutely. Hey, Dan. Thanks for the question. So fine-tuning, just to take a step back, when we train these large models, we're effectively training huge models on all the data on the internet. So they become general models. They have general knowledge and they can apply general common sense in a general way. When we talk about fine-tuning, what you mean is taking a general model and then kind of retraining a little bit so that it's focused on a specific domain or a specific set of documents. What we could do, for instance, is take one of these general models and train them on legislation, case law, contracts, that sort of thing, and create a legal version of one of these more general models. So that's the process of fine-tuning. In terms of how difficult it would be for an organization to do it themselves, right now, there is some, as Kara said, it's a bit controversial. OpenAI does allow you to kind of do it by just giving them the documents and they'll train a version of GPT-3 for you. This is useful for some things. It's not quite as much of an absolute slam dunk as you'd expect it to be. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Going forward, it will become more and more reliable and more useful, and we might see more and more of it. Because, there are some papers that are suggesting that as you start to focus a large language model's attention on a certain area, it becomes better at solving tasks in that area. And you also trade off against it's losing its general knowledge and its general common sense, and instead has a very specific worldview. So, I guess the jury's out on that, but it's definitely an exciting to watch.
Just keeps getting more and more exciting, doesn't it?
It is a very exciting time, actually. I know there's a lot of fear around it, but I think it has massive potential to streamline the way in which we deliver legal services. I think if utilised in the right way, and if people are very thoughtful around its use, I think its impact will be quite significant, both and also for clients. They will get real value, from delivery of legal services in every respect. So I think it's, I think there's more upside than what there is downside. We just need to work out how to navigate it all.
Absolutely. I wanted to thank you again, Karen and Mitchell, for staying on. I know that this has taken extra time out of your day. So thank you very much indeed for your generosity there. And thank you everyone again for attending. As I say, a great start to the AI in Legal series. Thanks everyone, and see you next week for the next one.
Thank
Bye.
you all. Bye all.
Yes.
Thanks, Terry. Bye.